ladies and gentlemen, here he is. Our dear friend Philip Ittner is with us, and he's joining us live from Ukraine, where he is safe and sound after being burgled. And by the way, I mean, who can? I mean, he was on camera bragging about the cool gifts he brought us back from there. I do have Johnny has his shirt. I have my shirt.
Yeah.
His well-known penchant for getting pickles. I'd burgle you too, my friend. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we're glad you're okay, though. That's the important thing. Everybody follow Philip Ittner at yeah. There you go.
yeah, I don't think it's indicative of anything. I just think it was a targeted opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that people are starting to realize that winter is going to be difficult.
Right.
So there's the
Sure.
opportunity.
Whoops. Little choppy. We'll be all right. Oh, lost him for a second. So yes, energy consumption is a thing over there, kids. So if there's some coming and going from that, or internet issues where he is, it's completely understood. We do know that he is. Oh, he'll sign back on. Give him a second. We do know that both power and internet are under limitations there. So fear not, all's well. He went out and picked up some food and then came back. The Russians are effectively out of the drones and missiles they would use to strike Kiev and others. They used them all up for all practical purposes last week in their flailing anger about the bridge that they blew up themselves and the pipeline that they blew up themselves.
After you run out of bullets, you throw the gun.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's just like they're fighting Superman, right?
Mm.
The bullets didn't penetrate his chest. Maybe a hand
So I'll
thrown.
throw this gun.
Right, maybe a hand thrown projectile will. So hopefully Philip will sign back on with us as we go on. But and I will, I will say that currently, right now, this very second, as we are speaking, major activity is going on in the Kherson region. And it looks right now the Russians are retreating from the area. That is currently happening. That is there is no there's no two ways about it. It is. Oh, and Philip's coming back. I think we'll have him back up in a second. There he is. Good, excellent.
There we go.
Welcome back. Not at all. It happens. The important thing is that you're all right and that you're with us again, and that's a good thing.
Really?
And I was just, yes, it is, Johnny.
Okay. Okay. Fine.
All right. Fine. I will say,
No more pickles for you, Johnny.
Right. See, I'm the one. I get all the pickles. That's right. I get all the pickles from now on. I will say, and there has been a lot of talk recently about what's going on in Kherson. I was just bringing it up as we speak. It looks like, for all practical purposes, the Russians are actively retreating from Kherson right now, that they are evacuating over using pontoons to some degree, but largely over the dam that they have rigged to explode, which is
dam that they're threatening. Yeah, the dam they're threatening to explode and flood the valley, the downstream from there, and
right.
Argue with the choice of words of evacuating or abducting, because the Ukrainians are claiming that in essence what they're doing is ethnic cleansing, and that they are grabbing all of these ethnic Russians from Ukraine, or just Ukrainians in general, and forcing them to move to Russia. I mean, there are estimates that not just in Kherson, not just during this immediate period, but over the course of the war, there are some estimates that over 1 million people have been forcibly extradited, many of them children, to Russia. So the Ukrainians look at it differently than an evacuation. They call it abduction. And then in addition to that, the Russians do it for their reasons and the Ukrainians do it for their reasons, but both sides are saying this is for the safety of the civilians. And the Ukrainians say, well, you're abducting people. But in addition to that, yes, we would prefer that civilians are not in the area because we're about to liberate the city. We're about to, kill as many Russians as we can, and that's going to include artillery fire and all sorts of stuff. So it's probably for the best, one way or the other, that civilians get out of the harm's way. Ukrainians would prefer, however, that they are allowed to go to Ukrainian territory instead of, as they say, be abducted by Russia.
Right. So the insofar though as the military, the soldiers themselves, there has been there's been a constant kind of recurring theme, which is they run out of resources because they've been cut off. They get surrounded, and then large portions of them either surrender or are killed, and then rinse repeat. And it seems to be that one of the arguments that I've heard for why Russia is having such a hard time in Ukraine is because NATO does what's called pull logistics. Pull logistics. And the Russians do push logistics. And for those listening, pull logistics means you're on the front line and you say, I need this, I need this, I need this, and they send it. And in Russia, what they do is they just send you stuff and they go, that's what you got, use that. And so if they send you the wrong stuff for the job you're doing, tough luck, make it work. And there's no recourse secondarily. So they tend to push their stuff into the front line. That's why there's so many ammo depots the way they are, is because there's going to be a pile of stuff there. Go use that pile. Which is,
and again, with no NCO class or an officer corps that has guys who are on the front line officer corps, not the kind of guys who sit back in the command post. The equivalent would be say a major or above. Broad strokes here.
Right.
But in our system, it would be like a major or above. Those guys rarely go out into the field onto the front line. But we do have an officer corps. We have lieutenants and captains and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And even you could argue majors and lieutenant colonels who may be at a forward operating base,
right?
But they're not the guys on the very, very front line. Whereas in Russia, you only have the guys in the headquarters far, far, far away from the fighting, and then you have everybody else. So the problem with that is with no NCO and no functioning, frontline officer corps, who isn't the guy that's going to send a message back saying we need specifically this, we need specifically that, and is going to be listened to?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if some private were to call up a combat operation base in a NATO structured system and said, we need X, they'd be like, private, you need to tell your sergeant, who needs to tell your captain,
right,
who will tell the major, and we will get you what you need. But that's not your role. In Russia, they don't have anybody who's kind of like consolidating what the guys on the front line are saying, and then creating a single line of communication. So it is absolutely like a bunch of guys sitting back at a base as a staging area and saying, you know what I think they need? I think they need this, 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 and that's what we're going to give them, and they'll make do. And clearly, that system, when it runs up against the NATO system, is not effective.
Right. So currently, the state of Russia, as we know it in terms of what they're saying, is that right now inflation in Russia is 13.7%. And that's their like highly public data. That's what they're saying it is, which is terrible. So it's obviously worse because they have no reason to tell the truth. There was a study done by The Economist about a week ago, I want to say, where they tracked using satellite activity. So they would look at satellite stuff to see lights that were on, factories that were running 24 hours a day, energy output, and all these kind of things. And they based it against the stated GDP of a country. So they looked at all the lights that were on in the United States, all the factory stuff that was on, and they made an estimation of how much activity that would produce monetarily, and it matched almost identically with America's output. Same thing with Germany, same thing with UK, good or bad. You can tell by the activity in the country and the number that they say that they're telling the truth, that it matches up. Russia and China both exaggerated their economic output, their GDP, by 140%. The activity that's actually going on in the country using satellite imagery, and they can tell not just which lights are on in what neighborhood, but like the volume of output at factories, literally, if you were building a certain thing or you're refining nickel or aluminum, you would need a certain amount of energy for a certain amount of volume. You can tell, like with thermal imaging, what they're doing. It's incredible. This is commercially available satellites that can tell this stuff. And Russia and China are both lying about their economic situation by at least 140%. And that's it, and that's with their inflation being almost double ours.
Yeah, and even worse than that, when it comes to Russia, and I don't know how it is in China, but in terms of Russia, there's this massive black and gray market. Mm-hmm. So when you look at like taxation as a indicator of GDP, you have no idea because everybody's evading tax. Everybody is squirreling something away in their back pocket that doesn't go on the books. So we have no idea what the Russian economy is, good or ill.
Yes.
It certainly isn't going into state coffers. That's something we can say with assurance, is that most likely the money that is flowing through the Russian economy, looking at state numbers, is not an good indication, because not only are they not going to include it in their own GDP, but they don't have proper taxation numbers because nobody's paying taxes properly. And in addition to that, the numbers that are flowing through the government, through the state, are oftentimes skimmed off. So again, a reliable measure of how they're doing. So, you know, it's and a system like that is doomed to failure. It doesn't work.
Right.
You can't have a functioning kleptocracy.
No.
It cannot for long.
Exactly. It is starving itself. Let's take a break. We went over the break anyways, but let's take a break. And when we come back, I do want to discuss sort of how long they can continue to do this. Like, how long can Russia hold its breath underwater in this self-inflicted tough guy exercise that they're involved in? It's weird. It makes no logical sense, and yet it seems mainly because maybe it's ego. We'll be back. Welcome back to the show. So we were talking during the break just about what Russia thought, this was going to be, in theory, what it was going to be like. And looking back over like the Chechnya war, which was, where they got more than they were expecting, or Afghanistan for that matter, they didn't seem to learn the lesson that Ukraine is a functioning country and that they would, it's going to take more work than these areas. And they seem to think it was going to go like Georgia, which lasted 6 days, and then they've just ever since been just pushing the border they created a little further and a little further until it was
the central government, putting in puppet quislings and all the rest of it. In Georgia, that's what they tried to do it here as well. They've been more successful in Georgia, but they tried to do. And one of the criticisms that they level against and that anti-Ukrainians who spout, Russian talking points will point to, is the fact that one of the things Zelensky did was he outlawed political parties here that were clearly clearly proxies for Russia.
Sock puppets, yeah.
And, and the Ukrainians said, you know what, if you were operating in good faith, we would let you operate as a party, but you are not operating in good faith.
Right.
And so we are banning your party. And of course, now everybody who says, oh, Ukrainians are Nazis, kind of point to this, and it's not fair to do that, because if we had somebody in our country saying, openly, oh, I think I want the North Koreans to own California.
Right.
And we're saying that makes the most sense. How do you think forcibly through, kind of manipulation and nefarious maneuvers and all the rest of it, they were somehow able to get some guy into Congress? I mean, we have a different system, but ultimately they'd be like, well, who are you serving, and why are you in the House of Representatives? Why are you? And we've had guys like that before.
Yes.
What was the guy from California? A couple of years ago, we finally got rid of him. And he was openly pro-Putin. He was openly getting money from the Kremlin.
Right.
Tulsi Gabbard is another example.
Exactly.
Tulsi is an example of it. It's like, well, you're not operating with good faith. You're operating in the interest of a foreign power, and an adversarial one. So why should we let you be part of our legislature?
Well, we do have a system similar to what Zelensky has available to him. We just use the FARA rules about that. And so over time, it's done on an individual basis, because free speech would project, if somebody wanted to start the Give Alaska Back to Russia party, they could, our system allows you to have that. You can't outlaw that. But if somebody was being paid specifically by Russia, or they'd been bought a house or a car or whatever to be part of that influence campaign, they've got to announce that, because that's considered a certain political activity where finances are involved, and therefore you got to say. There is no system in place. Right.
And Clinton got in trouble, rightfully so.
Yeah. So, and that system, the FARA system, quite frankly, is one of the most crucial aspects going forward that will protect this country from exactly that kind of sock puppeting, because people are going to have to announce that, especially if they are involved in a 501c3. I mean, there's going to be a bunch of, YouTubers and the like, but the minute they start a political party or start a political action committee of their own, they have to disclose that kind of stuff, which is why you'll see the Tulsi Gabbards of the world. In Ukraine in the past, somebody like that would have been in a prosecutor's office or something. But in the United States, they're relegated to a podcast. That's why she launched a podcast. And that's why she can't run for office, because she would have to admit to where the money was coming from. That's my theory. And that's a good thing. FARA,
wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, FARA is incredibly important as a for our security as a country. And it will become increasingly so, as this kind of soft power manipulation is one of the last vestiges of control that China, Russia, maybe even, I can't see the Iranian regime doing any of this manipulation, having it work, but there could be the Iranian oil and gas industry as a faux front for that group. Doing those kind of things. That could be possible. So you wanted to mention Lara Logan, because she got kicked off of Newsmax this week for going full QAnon. Yeah. And you had worked with her before. And we've,
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a little bit off. Okay. So, aside from my expertise in Russia, fair to Midland expertise in kind of the Middle East, because I've worked so much in these parts of the world as a journalist. I also worked for many years inside the higher levels of broadcast media. So I worked for CNN, I worked for Sky News in Britain, I did PBS, I did, you name it, Al Jazeera, ABC, NBC. But I worked for CBS from roughly 1994 until 2010. And from 2001 until 2010, I worked very much hand in glove with Lara. I was one of Lara's producers in Afghanistan primarily. In Iraq primarily, but also Afghanistan and other places. And I got to know Lara pretty well. And so I am not terribly surprised by this.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lara, you have to understand that Lara's not the only one who's like this, but she was a pronounced example of this.
Right.
That she defines herself as what she is in the public eye.
Mm-hmm.
She, for her sense of self-worth, staying in front of the camera is a very important, almost intrinsic part of her sense of self-worth, sense of identity. And so she clearly has gleamed on to the idea of this Christian nationalist movement that's happening within the right. And I don't know if she believes half the stuff she said on Newsmax that got her booted. I don't know if she has convinced herself, because I saw her be self-delusional many times for her own benefit. She convinces herself of this stuff. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Lara is desperate to be in front of television because that's how she defines herself and how she puts value on who she is, which is very sad. But she has always been like that. She was like that before what happened to her in Egypt. She was before that, she was like that before she got fired from 60 Minutes. She has always been like that. And unfortunately, that serves the lords and masters at these corporate entities because they want people with massive egos, because that's good television. It fits with their kind of their style of management to have somebody who has got this massive ego,
right?
And then you kind of have to serve her ego if you're working with her. And sadly, I don't think she's changed at all. And so to see her dissent is not unexpected for me, but it is still nevertheless very sad. I mean, one of the things people haven't talked about during that Newsmax interview with Bowling, they talked about a lot of stuff. People are talking about a lot.
Hold on. Save it through the break, though, because we got to take a break. We're right at the half hour. So let's, hold that over because I want to hear this and I want you to be able to get into it a little bit. This is, we're with Philip Ittner. He's live in Kiev right now. Or is he? I'm going to try to keep your location as secret as possible from this point on. And Johnny Million, of course, is on cat duty and question duty in the chat room. If you want to ask a question, Johnny Million will field those also coming up after the break. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, mega worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Sexy Liberal is live tonight. Tickets available because it's a pay-per-view. You can live stream it. Go to sexyliberal.com. I get it. I'm going to have to jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the House Sparks Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Sparks Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's going to be good.
The House Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
Yeah, it's going to be good. We're live with Philip Ittner. He's in Kiev. We're going to be asking, answering questions from the chat room in just a minute. But you were saying before we went to the break that there was someone akin other people in the world of the of media people who seem to be spotlight seekers more than news gatherers or what have you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the management of those news organizations foster that because they want people to be fearful of losing their space, their vaunted space on television,
right?
Because they define themselves that way, and also just it feeds to this kind of aggressive, narcissistic, kind of look at me, I got to be on TV sort of thing, and they foster that because it's to their benefit, but it is not good for news gathering, and all from that, as we're seeing with Lara, is pretty ugly to watch.
Right.
But I wanted to mention one last thing about this kind of situation with Lara. I could talk a lot about it, but there's one last thing I wanted to point out, is that, and something nobody is talking about. If you look at the interview with Bowling, how do I put this discreetly and politely? There's a certain part of her anatomy that is rather pronounced on purpose in that interview.
Yes.
That's not a mistake. That is absolutely not a mistake.
Right.
That is part of her identity. I used to see her use her sexuality repeatedly in Iraq to try and get, a benefit, to try and get, and you use the tools, and people will say, if that's an arrow in your quiver, who are you to say no? Fine, all well and good, but it's so thirsty. It's so desperate.
Right.
And so I'm sorry to see Lara. I mean, I didn't have a great time working with her because she's very difficult and her ego is enormous, and she's I mean, it's all about get on TV, look at me,
right.
As opposed to doing news. And when the spotlight was taken away from her, she has gone down a spiral of desperation, becoming increasingly desperate to get on TV. So she will spout the beliefs, whether she believes them or not, that will appear to a conservative religious audience. And then she will also wear a wonder bra. I mean, it's not about the news. It's about
it's a very TV. Yeah, it is. Interestingly enough, and I've talked about Eric Bowling. He's the guy who has John Paul McIsaac, the laptop dude, on there. This dude has been in the process of servicing this storyline for quite some time, and Eric Bowling is one of these folks that has I don't know if it's work done or just too much makeup over bourbon bloat. It's hard to tell sometimes.
Oh,
but
makeup and bourbon bloat.
He looks like he's made out of marzipan at this point. It's very strange, and he tends to,
he
operate.
Too sounds delicious.
Boiling marzipan. But the essence though is that it's a very, visually oriented man having very visually oriented things on his show, and it makes a lot of sense. And the Newsmax is where people start to fall through the cracks. If you want to watch the downward spiral of someone as far as relevance goes, it starts with being on Newsmax. You can be there on your way up, but if you've been on CNN or you've been on 60 Minutes or you've been on something like that, and now you're on Newsmax, it's actually worse than being on a rando podcast. Because the illusion of genuine news that they try to create is part of the failure itself. Whereas, if you're on a podcast, who cares?
And that's when you get to a place on Newsmax. At that point, that you're using all the trappings of bigger, more prestigious media, but you're just kind of exacerbating it. And you're, I mean, it's for ladies, it's the short skirts and the push-up bras and the massive plastic surgery, and I guess for men there's an equivalence as well. But I find with like the bowling, or the kind of what we see Tucker and Bowling doing of this kind of like faux alpha male persona that they put.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it's a caricature of the characteristics that they're trying to monetize, and it's exactly what branding is. Right. It's like the illusion that not everybody likes maybe everybody doesn't deserve a break today, but McDonald's isn't going to tell you otherwise because they want you to come in. And there's an element to that with this alpha male.
In the immortal words of Perry Farrell, now the news is just another show.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's an excellent point and an excellent person to quote in that regard. So a couple of elements that I want to discuss. And we have questions, Johnny Million. Do you have you grabbed some yet? Yeah,
I've got one where they were asking if we can get a Starlink for Phil.
Oh, right. The Elon Musk Starlink, right? Yeah.
I think had a question.
Starlink is probably
needed
more
rainy season there. until the ground freezes and they can move artillery.
Sorry, run that by me again because he was talking over that.
Are the Russians trying
No,
to
I
run
heard it.
out the raiding season there until the ground freezes and they can move the artillery?
I don't think so. I don't think that's the reason why the Russians are not mounting some sort of offensive or something. I think they're more concerned with just responding to the Ukrainian offensive.
Yeah.
Yes, what is called the Rasputitsa is on its way. It's starting to rain to get into that season, and it's going to be much more difficult to move around, even more than when winter does come through. But the question, and it's a good question, and I'm glad it was posed, but it presupposes that Russia has agency, and increasingly it does not.
Mm-hmm.
Increasingly, Russia is responding to what the Ukrainians do, not driving the war. They're dancing to Ukraine's tune, whereas for most of this war, in many ways, the Ukrainians were having to respond to Russian action.
Mm-hmm.
That now has switched. So, would they like to get through the rainy, muddy season and then get into winter so that they had better maneuver? I mean, that would be, yes, absolutely. You have to also keep in mind that their artillery is depleted massively.
Right.
Their ammunition stores, they're not the ones in control.
Mm-hmm.
Ukrainians are the ones in control.
Right.
And unless something really significant, unexpected happens, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see how much territory changes hands in the next 2-ish months,
Right.
2.5 months. And then when it really does freeze over, we'll see what that is. Because, it's good for vehicles. It's bad for infantry.
Yeah.
Winter is terrible for infantry.
Especially if you don't have enough stuff. If you don't have supplies.
Yeah. And even with the best supplies, I mean, unless you are specifically trained Arctic troops, which is a very specific set of skills and training, infantry doesn't do well in the heavy temperatures, sub-zero temperatures that we're going to get in Ukraine. You can be as well equipped as possible, but that level of cold depletes an infantryman significantly. And again, it's great for moving armor around. It's really bad for digging foxholes,
Right.
as our boys who fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II learned pretty brutally. It's hard to dig in when it's permafrost. So this is going to be a tough season. Both fall and winter are going to be very difficult seasons. But to paraphrase I think it was the Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine, this war should be over by spring or summer.
Right.
And I need to jump in because Buddha and the Eagle just donated money directly to Phil.
That's awesome.
Oh. How?
We will.
They wanted to send 500, but they were only allowed to send $250.75. That's very generous. Buddha.
Thanks so much. We'll forward that to you.
Oh, man,
yeah, there it is. There you go. Thanks.
Well, hey, guys, that is so sweet of you. And I know you're all concerned. And I get these, notices of concern when I disappear for a little while while I'm traveling or something. Or if I tweeted out when I got burgled, look, nobody worry. It's an inconvenience or anything. I'm okay. I'm okay. You're very, very sweet. And I appreciate all the support. And I won't say no to the support.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one who's above taking gifts of support and all the rest of it. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Don't over concern yourself with me. I'm going to be fine. It's just a pain in the posterior.
Yeah.
But no donations over $175 at a time, please.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not get crazy.
All right. Yeah. So I will forward that. I'll forward that to you, Phil. Yeah.
Boy, I'm touched.
Yeah, I mean, we got a good crowd of people here, by the way. This
There's a bunch of people
That's
watching
right.
this,
It's the
aren't
House
there?
Parks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio. We got to take a break. We'll come back right after this with more of your questions and more of your love and support for Phil as well. So, and Johnny Million and his cat. And me and Sexy Liberal tonight.
You are happy, let us be happy together. Whether the weather is cloudy or sunny, I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky, let us get lucky together. Whether the weather is cloudy or breezy, I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. Cause isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you, chugga chugga choo choo, woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling, let us smile together. Whether the weather is cloudy or stormy, I will still be there in the morning. I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning. I hope that you like cereal.
Yeah.
Can I just say for the record, one of the things that we don't get to point out often enough is how masterful her uke playing is in that. Because that's listen to the timing of her playing that. It's like that noon again that she's doing, that's just, it's very impressive. I'm just saying. I mean, beyond the beautiful singing voice and the lovely lyrics. Very talented.
Very talented woman.
So, we were mentioning we were mentioning during the break that the leader, the installed leader of the Kherson Oblast, in Ukraine has ordered the evacuation of Kherson. My feeling is there's been a similar order on the down low of Crimea as well, because it seems like whether they need to be told or not, people are beating feet, especially after the bridge, to get out while they can. And again, I have a tendency to believe that not only having seen the pictures that Sweden pushed and put up of the actual pipeline, the explosion looks like it was from the inside of the pipeline out, which totally feeds into my pig theory. And then the same thing with the bridge, that they blamed on this truck, arrested a bunch of people, and yet they themselves must know that there was a vehicle under the bridge that was more likely the culprit, that was to the right of the bridge, to the right of where the truck was, and was more likely the thing that actually exploded. So it's all for show. And we know they're not above a good, false flag.
There's another point I want to make. Oh, absolutely not. There's one more point I want to make about the Kherson. I'll do it right now.
Yeah.
And then I got to make another point about that whole fake narrative that they push.
Right.
But before we move on from the Kherson mayor, he put out a video. It's god awful, with a poem written by himself.
Oh yeah.
Saying the lyrics are such that I see Prague, I see Warsaw. They're Russian.
Yeah.
I see Paris. I see London. That's Russia too.
Yeah.
This whole sort of
Ruska-Mir thing.
There will come a time when Russia will be the dominant, and all land is ours because we are Russia and we are glorious. It's sad and pathetic because the guy's also not talented at all. But it shows you the mentality of these guys. So moving away from the Kherson mayor, I want to talk a little bit about the false narrative issue, because there was another thing that happened on Russian TV, which was I want to say, again, it wasn't Shoigu, but it was somebody in the defense ministry or somebody in the security apparatus who was doing an interview, and he didn't realize his mic was hot. And he sat down before the interview started, and there was a live feed, and he said, and they must have been streaming as well as broadcasting, because his mic is hot, and he's sitting down, and he says to the interview, let's just not talk about the Iranian drones. Yes, we we all know that they're Iranian, but we're not supposed to say it. And he did it with a hot mic.
Oh.
I mean, and so it's just
well, and also,
not only are you guys capable of changing the narrative, but you're just so sloppy.
Well, one of the other pieces of information that came out about the Iranian drones this week is that there are Iranian techs in Crimea on the ground helping them operate those drones. Now, the West and NATO has been very specific that they're like, we'll show you how to use them, but you got to come to Poland for this, or Turkey, trainings, to use stuff. But we're not going to have techs next to you flipping the switch on your behalf or telling you what button to push, because that's an escalation. That's the World War escalation. That's what we don't want. And so the West has been very good about that. There's been people like Malcolm and others who are there by their own choice. Malcolm. But
me.
Right.
I'm not a fighter, but those of us who came here heretofore that we know about. I'm not going to live in a rose-tinted world, but I would not be terribly surprised that there are active military here working as liaison officers, or I even kind of ran into it in Lviv in the very, very beginning of things. But they're not out there like trainers are,
right?
Which Moscow has repeatedly said, if you sin, or operators, if you sin that, it will be a red line for us. Well, now we're seeing them in Crimea, so they've lost the high ground. And many people have been saying one of the things that is desperately needed here is not only trainers, operators, but also like people who can assist in repair and recovery and maintenance and that kind of stuff to keep what we gave them working. But now, also in addition to that, with the increased threat from the drones and from missiles, and clearly Russia's intention to try and bomb the Ukrainian people into submission, which will not happen. I don't know if the stream was happening at the beginning of this talk, but I started in a packed restaurant picking up my dinner. Nobody was afraid. Everybody was out. It's a Saturday night. It's not going to work. They're not going to intimidate these people.
In somewhat,
but there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk about sending in advisors and operators for anti-aircraft weaponry, most notably what is called, when it's a naval system, it's called a phalanx system, which is this incredible Gatling gun that we used in Iraq and Afghanistan to shoot down mortars. So it could equally be used to shoot down drones or even missiles. And that would be, I think, of great use to the Ukrainians, but they would have to be taught how to use them, and they need them ASAP. So there may come a time before too long, now that that Rubicon has been crossed with the Iranians in Crimea, you might see NATO advisors on the ground here. We'll have to wait and see. Yeah. But clearly we have to do something to improve their air defense, because it's going to get worse.
Agreed. I mean, ultimately, the fact that, I mean, it's a bad step that the Russians are bringing Iranian, techs who've created these drones in to actually run them, actually help with targeting, actually help them make them more lethal, because they are dumb-ish drones even still. So it's kind of a weird situation where you couldn't figure out how to use one of those things. That you would need a tech is very sad and odd. Like that in and of itself is a terrible sign, because it's not. These are not high-quality drones.
Iran, which has been under sanctions for 50 years now. That they're the guys that you're going to call in because your own experts can't figure it out. Yeah. I mean, now mind you, how, I don't know if you remember, Johnny, I don't know if you remember this, but about a decade ago, the Iranians did capture one of, I think, was our Raptor drones. Yep. And reverse engineered it. So they do that because they stole a drone from us. That they were able to, steal some of that technology. But those things, those Shahabs are awful. They're terrible. I mean, it is so funny to hear Ukrainians talk about them, because they do. They call them mopeds. Yeah. Because the sound of the engine is so loud. Wow. And they're not very destructive. They're not very effective.
They have to use a lot of them. Weapons. And it's a sign, by the way, it is a sign of the Russians committing war crimes, because these things have to be set. They're dumb drones. They have to be set on a coordinate early, and they have to be intentionally sent towards something. You're giving it a coordinate. So if it hits an apartment block, that's where it was meant to go. And not only that, they know that many of them will be shot down on the way in because they're so slow and so noisy. So they send multiple ones. So there's multiple evidence that it's like in a murder and attempted murder charge where you fired at someone several times and then you shot them, they have the other bullets too to prove that you were shooting at the person while they were walking. You were intending to do this, that you can't claim that the one that hit them was an accident because your gunfire was following them as they walked. That's evidence. The same thing is true in Iran right now. With the Iranian drones in Ukraine right now, that they are sending 8, 10 of these things in to try and hit an apartment block or civilian infrastructure, which is illegal in the rules of war. Not like Russia cares, but it's true. And they're doing it over and over again because they know they're using crap and the stuff is easily shot down. Now, we're low on time, so let me check and see if there was another question, Johnny Million, before I get on.
I think we got them all.
Okay,
because
great.
You guys were covering what they were asking.
Okay, great.
Well, let me just say, look, we're definitely going to have electrical grid problems. Right
Yep.
now, I look out the window, it is absolutely pitch dark because I'm probably one of the only people in my area, which is this is 3 large square blocks of the city. And I don't see more than 2 other, windows with lights on. A lot of people have left. A lot of people are taking heed of what the government is telling them to do in terms of energy consumption.
Yep.
We are told to get as many of these as we possibly can, power banks, and to fill them up during the day or overnight if we have power when the usage is low. I am noticing in the stores that they are becoming increasingly rare to find and buy. People are preparing for a very difficult winter. And I fear that that when that happens, the bon ami, the solidarity between Ukrainians may fracture slightly because there are always going to be people who are opportunists. There are always going to be people who are driven to desperation. We're going to try to avoid that as much as possible here in Kiev, I'm sure. But there are going to be. So look, I got burgled, okay, and I'm not drawing the conclusion. What I am saying is that there are going to be people who are going to be opportunist or desperate. But by and large, I still have faith in the Ukrainian people, and I think generally they will stick through this winter, survive, and get on the other side. But everybody is preparing for it, and they may be putting on a brave face. But there's a lot of trepidation in Kiev about not only being attacked because we're the capital, but also, how are we going to sustain ourselves when so much of the energy infrastructure is going to be destroyed?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a tough winter. It's going to be a really tough winter, but nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's afraid. And everybody is kind of like, well, we'll just have to struggle through a difficult winter, and then we'll beat the Russians.
The entirety of the structure of the country existed before, gas heating in homes for centuries. So, again, even as tough as those kind of things are, there's recourse now in modern society that just simply did not exist back then, and people will make it. They will. That said, we're out of time, but I'm gonna throw this out on our way out the door as a thought. Iranian and China-related documents were found amongst the stuff that Trump had at Mar-a-Lago. It is no surprise that there's a lot of linkages between what Russia and Iran are doing and the fact that he tried to abscond with some stuff around this. The timing is very telling, and the chances that he'll be indicted around this stuff is going up by the day. Thank you so much, Philip Ittner. Thank you, Johnny Million. Thank you, Buddha Eagle.
On Wednesday?
Yeah.
Help?
Yes.
Okay, done. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
And thank you for your love and support.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. We'll see you guys next week. Take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. And thank you, Chicago. We'll see you guys soon.